Is there anyone else left to join, Abhivardhan?
Well, Shashank and others might join later. I think that depends. So yeah.
So, yes, what do you think about our idea about because the elections are almost near, we thought of starting today 5 or 6 parts of Modi foreign policy review, basically Modi governments. So today we are starting with neighborhood. So that was the idea basically.
I think it's quite a smart idea. I think it would fit really well into the whole theme because I mean, in the media ecosystem, the grander theme seems to be that something like 4 billion of the world's people are heading to the polls this year. So I would say it's quite a smart move, especially with Jaishankar. I should say External Affairs Minister Jaishankar's books coming out by Bharat Matters. I think it's even more fitting.
Yeah. So Abhivardhan, whenever you decide, we can start.
Yeah, I think Aditya, I think we can begin. We are already live on YouTube. So yeah, we can begin now. So yeah, go ahead.
So hello everyone, we are back with another round of our Globalized series after a few months. I'm not sure exactly how many months, 3 or 4, but yeah, it has been a while. And in this series of Globalized podcast for Bharat Pacific, we have decided to cover because the elections are around the corner. I don't know when Election Commission will declare the dates, perhaps in February or March. So we thought this is the correct time to actually talk about um Prime Minister Modi's second term's foreign policy. And as I'm not sure by the end of the series how many parts it will be, but today we have agreed upon starting with India's neighborhood policy under Modi Jaishankar Doval trio. To an extent, even Shah, because Shah's internal security also has neighborhood ramifications. So there is that. But mostly it will be the trio. And yeah, so Yus, before we go into specifics about discussion, can you summarize what do you think about Modi 2.0's neighborhood policy?
So it's let me come up with something interesting because I'm sure as we talk about the specifics, we'll start to unpack the different shades that exist within the foreign policy. But if I were to put it in a sentence, it would be firm continuation. That's how I would put it. So you'll hear a lot of foreign policy experts state that India's foreign policy, regardless of changes in political administration, doesn't change too much. As in, there is broad continuity on aspects such as strategic autonomy, hedging, maintaining friendly relations. Oh my God, that was a handful. Friendly relations with all our neighboring countries. But what's happened under Modi, I would say, is that it's become a lot firmer. If you go back to UPA 1 and more specifically UPA 2, you'll notice that even though these same strands existed in that political administration, they were not as firm. In that, a lot of different things were up in the air. Direction was sort of lacking. I mean, you were sure one moment you were going there, you were sure the next moment you were not. Modi 1.2 sort of took care of these problems, but over there, I would argue that a lot came down to Sushma Swaraj. And frankly, perhaps there was a dip in how well we could have done diplomacy. When I say do diplomacy, I mean taking our perspective to the rest of the world and helping them understand what we're saying. I mean, Sushma Swaraj was many would say she was a fantastic external affairs minister. But if you ask someone to come up with what she did concretely, the way Jaishankar has in terms of foreign policy, other than maybe expediting visas, which I don't want to denigrate because that has its own PR value. A lot of people will actually sort of cluster and try and come up with these connected responses, like one thing connects to another. What Modi 2.0 did, especially under Jaishankar, is it's made our foreign policy direction a lot firmer in that now we have articulated what we see as our aim. A lot of people are confused about what that aim is, but I would argue it's actually quite clear. And as the conversation goes on, maybe we'll touch upon these points. But because of that articulation and because we have a technocrat in the External Affairs Ministry, you start to see, even in this space, you'll notice it. We are able to grasp what India is trying to do. Like we may have questions about the particulars of certain relationships, but on the whole, if you ask people here, what you would broadly take away as India's stand in foreign policy, you will get at least one or two concrete answers. The last point I'll touch on before I hand it back to you is that there's a very interesting something I call troika or the troika that's come up within the foreign policy establishment, especially when foreign policy starts intersecting with national security, as it often happens in our neighborhood. Which is you have Ajit Doval, who's the national security advisor officially, but unofficially he is probably he's tied for the second most influential person in India alongside Amit Shah, working alongside External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, together with the most powerful man in India, which is the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. And I don't think we've ever, at least not since the days of Indira Gandhi, had such a strong PMO, such a strong External Affairs Ministry, and such a strong, External Affairs Minister, and such an influential National Security Advisor. A lot of people go back to Brijesh Mishra, but this troika never existed under the Vajpayee government. I mean, this is not to take away from the Jaswant Singh era and what he was able to deliver. I'm just saying, we never saw this kind of synergy between the three, you can say, heads, right? Even though technically Ajit Doval is not a head. So that's another interesting development that I don't think people really notice too much because it's purposely kept under wraps. But I'm hoping as we continue, we'll be able to unpack this a little bit as well. Aditya, it's back to you.
Yes, just a second. Yeah. So, Abhivardhan, let's start with you on the specifics. Let's start with the neighboring island nations in the south, specifically Sri Lanka and Maldives. In Modi 2.2, I mean, both nations can be, I mean, two nations are so different at the way they uh, turned around vis-a-vis India in terms of relations. I mean, of course, it has always been like that, zigzags. One term it's like up, another term it's down. So this is not very different from how the respective relationships have worked. But it's quite interesting the way Maldives has turned the political climate in the country has turned around India, and how Sri Lanka has turned around. In fact, Sri Lanka seems to be like now it seems to be moving more towards a bipartisan thing than a one party specific thing. And Maldives at the moment seems to be a very party specific India choice. So, Abhivardhan, can you expand upon it?
Sure. Most happily. Well, with Maldives, first of all, it's a small nation, huge nation syndrome, like the Mexico syndrome, like the Mexicans keep abusing the United States for all reasons they have. I mean, but with Maldives, there is no justifiable reason. We know why Maldives is behaving like this, because the problem is that the political consensus kind of changed, and now the opposition leaders have come up with a motion that this government must be subjected to a no confidence motion. Let us see how that unfolds. And of course, there was a paper by Dr. Alvite, who's one of the guests, and of course a professor at Symbiosis, brilliant person. He wrote a paper in 2015 about the radicalization of the Maldivian Muslims per se, and he wrote about that, how it's happening in the Maldives. Why are Maldives interested in a war in Syria, or why are they interested in Hamas and Fatah? So, weirdly, I mean, they were not interested, right? I mean, Maldives has been a tourist spot, and it has been a special place, and it has been prospering also. But
And
they were
sorry to
yeah.
interject, and not to forget Maldives. I think, if not the highest, it is one of the highest. I mean, those countries that sent highest per capita soldiers for ISIS, if I am not wrong. Like, so that says something about it.
Yeah, that says. I mean, the paper was written in 2015. It's nearly 10 years. So, of course, the change is huge and tremendous. So it's sad to see how it's happening for Maldives. But yeah, on the Lakshadweep versus Maldives social media spat, I don't know how India is
Social media
responsibly.
part, Abhivardhan, social media part we will come later. I will have a separate like question on it. But
We will
can
do.
you, yeah, at the
Yeah.
moment just be specific to the larger country specific trends. But yeah.
So the larger trend shows that, even if we compare it to further, previous governments, the one best part is, despite COVID, despite Ukraine, despite Gaza, despite certain issues in G20 Bali, now we can see and can confidently can say that India has kind of become gradualist in a more flexible way. It can flex its muscles, but not like, in a very absolutist way. But I think we are creating our own space without, being in a troublesome situation. And yes, we are speaking our mind in a more confident way, but it's more practical despite the ups and downs. So, I mean, I know that just recently the Maldivian president came back and said, without naming a country, we shall not be bullied even if we are small and all that. Fine, that rhetoric happens, but I mean, otherwise also I think India is well managed. I think we'll discuss our neighbors, especially the BBIN countries, and of course Pakistan. So we'll do that. But yeah, that's my summarization. Yeah.
Yeah, Yus, can you take up on Sri Lanka? He expanded on Maldives, the same similar views on Sri Lanka. How do you see how the Sri Lanka thing is going on?
I think so. The narrative of Sri Lanka is actually slightly a little more complex because while many are very quick to play the relationship that we had, so I'm talking about the past tense here, that we had with Sri Lanka as a purely adversarial one, where we were almost sort of like at each other's throats and the GCP had like completely taken over the island. It wasn't that adversarial. There were still shades of grey within that relationship. And India was steadily building influence. But I think the economic crisis that they suffered, right, and the role that the Chinese played in it, or I would say the fact that the Chinese made investments that were very quickly seen to be totally useless, also played into the grander narrative that was building up, which is that the Chinese have pulled one over the Sri Lankans. And when India got along certain other foreign powers to aid Sri Lanka while aiding Sri Lanka itself, I think more than the popular messaging, it sent a message to Sri Lanka's elite, which is that, all said and done, who's your closer neighbor who's going to come and bail you out, right? And I think while that's very easy to dismiss offhand by stating that, no, it's not really relevant, realpolitik will take care of this in XYZ years, it does matter because when the chips are down the next time, are the Sri Lankans really going to be as pro CCP as they once were? And I would confidently say no, they're not, because it has played a massive role. The second thing is that for all intents and purposes, the quote unquote R man, I know that has a whole load of connotations attached to it, but just roll with me. Quote unquote R man is now seen to be in Sri Lanka, right? And everyone knows who I'm talking about here. And because it's a very quote unquote India friendly administration, uh, you're not seeing anywhere near the kind of hostility that once was sort of the norm between India and Sri Lanka. I also think I'm getting a little too micro here, but I also think it will give India a little more leverage when it comes to dealing with the issue of Tamils in Sri Lanka. The reason I bring this up is within India, there has always been a very strong push to quote unquote aid the Tamils, which is to say, ensure that the Tamils get a fair shake, right? And this is across party lines. It comes from BJP's Tamil Nadu unit, it comes from the ADMK, it comes from the DMK, and it even comes from some of the more extreme parties within Tamil Nadu's political scene. And I think by successfully expanding Indian influence in that in that region. So when I say region, I'm also including the Maldives here, even though it's like quite a bit far away. But just once again, roll with me. Um, by expanding Indian influence there, we've also bought ourselves enough leverage to push some of these points through that otherwise would not have gone through. So on the whole, the Indo-Sri Lankan and before I forget, a very important point. I don't know if how many of you saw this, but there was a news story where the Sri Lankans had informed India that they were no longer allowing the Chinese spy ship to dock on their port, right? And this came after sustained efforts by the Indians, or I should say, a message by the Indians sent to Sri Lankans to, that we would take issue with such things happening. So that's another implication of what it means for India's influence to be growing within the neighborhood. And I keep making this point, so I'll make this point again and then end it. I had said that it's very important to always build positive relationships, no matter how bleak the situation in the present seems. Right? I made this I made this point in the last space we spoke, and this is precisely why. Right? Because when you have a broad understanding of what your policy is, when you're working towards a common goal, and you build relationships within a certain country, when certain things like the economic crisis in Sri Lanka happens, you are better positioned than other powers to play a more influential role, right? And then if you exploit that role well enough, going forward, it's smoother sailing within that relationship. So if you look at the kind of position Sri Lanka has taken vis-a-vis India today, it's leagues apart from what that position used to be. Now, of course, it will be up to both countries to ensure that this continues. But that's a conversation for another day. I hope that satisfactorily answered your question.
Yeah, extending upon that, I think speaking on Maldives and Sri Lanka, I personally think, especially Maldives, I mean, apart from the security aspects, and of course, every country has the right to uh, choose or decide if certain big, quote unquote, big neighbors, security forces should be on their island or like anything related to it. But I don't think it's I mean, hostility per se would result into anything negative against India, except for the one issue, that is basically how how much free room would our security apparatus get to operate or nearby or in Maldives, how much they would cooperate with our security interests. Except for that, I don't think there is any other consequence for us. So in that way, we have to, I mean, Ajit Doval and Jaishankar have to actually think about how to deal with that aspect. So it is not I'm pretty much sure, like China, even if it wants to, maybe not able to directly operate there if they want to, because there is too much to lose for Maldives, even though the rhetoric might seem like that. On Sri Lanka, I personally think we are hitting some kind of a base level even with the Sri Lankan opposition. As you said, we have a pro-India government at the moment in Sri Lanka, but I don't think Rajapaksas or any other opposition in Sri Lanka in the future. I think we have hit that, we have passed or at least survived that phase of, okay, seeing very extremes of pro-India and anti-India regimes in Sri Lanka. I think we are hitting some level of a base case cooperation scenario. I don't know if I'm.
And Aditya, just to come in here very quickly, I think it's also important to mention that you are also starting to see a lot of that very virulent Sinhala nationalism. That I don't know again how many Indians picked up on, but it was very pronounced before the economic crisis, right? Like I'm talking at the more popular scale here, of course, not at the level of elites, but it was a factor, and that there was very and that Sinhala nationalism is important because it's not like nationalism in and of itself is bad, but to completely ignore the very violent history that Sinhala nationalism has caused within the region, especially to Tamils, and the entire conflict that erupted from the tension it had with the Tamil community is not to be ignored. And the fact that it has toned down, at least for now, right, in the aftermath of that crisis, and Indian influence is expanding in the region, I don't think people should sleep on this. And I hope that our policymakers always have this in the back of their mind when they think about Sri Lanka.
Yeah. I was coming to that point only. The two things have happened in the last 15 years, right? When it comes to Sri Lanka, one was a kind of a almost end of the, in practical effective terms, the ramifications of Tamil nationalism in Sri Lanka. Basically, Prabhakaran's death and LTT's almost collapse, and so one form of nationalism was dead. But Sinhala nationalism, uh, which overstayed, I mean, I think it was very rampant till the economic crisis. I mean, even though the Rajapaksas did lose for a term in between, it was quite a, it took a different turn. It was kind of getting into a territory where it might hurt our interest. But then again, even that has been checked by the economic crisis. So two forms of basically extremes in the Sri Lanka have been shown the reality check in the last 15 years. So at least for the near to medium term, at least till the time India grows its size, weight, etc., where we can actually have more insurance and hedge against such forms. I think we are good for now, at least when it comes to Sri Lanka, at least from the medium term perspective. Now, let's come to our northern neighbors before getting into the. Yes, Sri.
Aditya, I'm so sorry, but I just wanted to again add a very small piece to what Abhivardhan was saying on the Maldives. I'd just like to add two broad points. Number one, people need to realize that this swing, right, or this seesaw between anti-India and pro-India forces in the Maldives has sort of become the norm, right? So you'll always get one term. So you'll get the Maldives Democrats who will be very pro-India, and then you've got Muizo's guys who are very pro-CCP and very anti-India. The this which brings me to the second point. The second point that we should be paying attention to is how well the government of India is doing in expanding its influence in the information domain in the Maldives. Because I remember reading from a bunch of experts that before Muizo's ascension to power, they had actually, the CCP, I should say, had actually helped Muizo's party very successfully plant a lot of fake information, like just outright fake information, like we were trying to take over their islands and turn it into a military outpost. And what was the reason? Oh, it was the Dornier aircrafts with the service personnel stationed. Even though with that level of service personnel, you can't really take over the island and turn it into a military base, right? But it's sold. And countering that sort of information, and not simply countering it, but also harnessing it to target the pro-CCP individuals within the Maldives, as well as expanding Indian influence, I think that should be a key focus area for India. Because from the outside, at least, it seems like we are slightly lacking in that area.
Yeah, and I think, but use I okay. Another point on Maldives or a question for both of you: is it just about CCP or like major elements of Maldives' current ruling government is also ideological, basically? Because CCP can at best give some money and, of course, incentives, but I personally think it's mostly driven by the Islamist ideology. I mean, of course, with the help of certain Pakistani elements, Turkey, etc., etc. I mean, but can they sustain this ideological drive? That is what the question. I'm not sure.
Maybe
I'm not.
Abhivardhan can take that first because
Yeah,
we've been speaking too much. So
yeah, we are done. But is it sustainable? Because it is one thing to say ideology can carry your politics and your country's security, foreign policy interests for a medium to big size country. But Maldives, for all practical purposes, even if they want to, they cannot move away from India. They have to rely on India for everything, basically, because it's just impractical. Otherwise, I mean, of course, they can choose to import and export from, I don't know, far away lands of Pacific Ocean, etc., etc. But it's just going to get expensive for them. So they have to rely for even disaster, be it maybe disaster response or normal economic goods, imports, exports, even for entertainment, basically little entertainment, like they consume our entertainment also. So literally everything. So I don't know how long they can continue to just drive ideological policy.
Well, okay, so I'll be quick on this. I think because, this reminds me of a country called New Zealand, which tried to be too much cozy with the Chinese, and after Jacinda Ardern being gone, now they're realizing, and they had a meeting with our Indian counterparts, including the External Affairs Minister. I think that fantastic interview we had discussed in the localized sessions in the past. What did they say? The minister said that we committed a mistake by not understanding Indian foreign policy and what is our relationship with China. So of course, it's kind of like Canada also. Like, okay, fine, you're a power in the Five Eyes, but how much valuable are you, and how much credible are you? And of course, the Canada wormhole is funny every day. So I don't think Maldives will get any help from the Americans or the Europeans. They're not interested. uh, no major African power is gonna be there. I don't think Africa has any locus standi. So yeah, which is the power equation coming up? It's India or China. Now the fact is that by any natural geography, is Maldives near Taiwan? I don't think so. Is it near Djibouti? No. It's just very downward near Lakshadweep, right? It's in the Indian Ocean region of the Indo-Pacific, the core Indo-Pacific we know, right? So it has to rely on India, and India will be the big daddy. I mean, there are certain countries which are gonna be the big daddy, which are gonna be having a big daddy like India for all good reasons. Nepal, even Bhutan, Maldives, Sri Lanka, and others. But I think this is a reality. I think the problem is it's a very reactive foreign policy, because we have to remember Abdullah Shahid, the foreign minister, the previous one. He was a successful diplomat. I think he was the president of the UNGA. So from that level of becoming the president of UNGA, I mean, again, even if the United Nations is not useful, it's useless, I know, but still UNGA gives a lot of credibility to the Maldivian leadership, right? Which is why Abdullah Shahid was so important, even in the G20. And now Abdullah Shahid is gone, of course, because the government is gone. They have lost the election. The Maldivian leadership is just on an abyss. I don't know which kind of a plunging they want. So there is no going away. They signed some 20 MOUs. I remember Siddhant Sibbal, the Beyond guy, a talented guy, he posted about it. But again, I think the one which you should be concerned is about the comprehensive strategic partnership one, because the comprehensive strategic ships which countries have, they are important. But even at that point, I think the Chinese leadership is being very, very desperate to milk out anything from Maldives for their own sake, which is again shooting at their own, shooting down.
Abhivardhan, just to interject, I think maybe we are spending too much time on two nations in the south, but still, I mean, because this is the Modi 2.0 foreign policy review, I just want to know, like, is our government doing right stuff to bet against, fight it, or like hedge against it, or like neutralize it, whatever you want to call it?
So I think the best answer is that I was discussing this with a very important IR analyst, and he said that, despite after Lok Sabha elections or even before, will India be stuck with its neighborhood issues for this year? Well, I don't think that India will be stuck to the neighborhood that much, despite Pakistan, Maldives, but and Bangladesh is fine now, so we'll discuss Bangladesh and Sheikh Hasina, but and even Taiwan a little, if use wishes to. So I think no, I don't think India is doing anything unreasonable. It is playing a very, very soft card. I think there was a very brilliant article in the Hindustan Times or somewhere. I will share it in the space.
Yeah, Hindustan Times. It was Hindustan Times. It was Hindustan Times. Yeah. Yes. You want to expand, or shall we move to the other?
I'll just be very brief about it. Right, like I have two analogies. So if anyone wants to think of movies, right, those of you who watch football, you can sort of think of him as Ty from AFT, right? Like the guy who comes on a microphone and just chats the most mad banter ever, right? Like the most delusional stuff you'll ever hear about any football team ever. He's telling people that they should be relegated. He's saying that all the referees are, corrupt, and they're basically out to get Arsenal. That's probably Muiz, right? But the one that all of you will identify with is that he's sort of the Desi Justin Trudeau, right? Like he does not realize where he is and what he's doing. I say that with quite a lot of responsibility, because what he's doing is not hitting. What he's doing is taking a 12-gauge shotgun, loading it with buckshot, pointing it at his balls, and pulling the trigger, right? The only reason why he is allowed to continue saying the kind of stuff he is, right, and taking those, weird snipes at India, is because India is nowhere near as imperialistic as China, right? Forget sending in aircraft carriers and stuff like that other people are talking about. If India had a bunch of people get into fishing boats and rowed themselves all the way to Maldives, right, we could still take it over in a heartbeat. A lot of people don't understand this fact. The reason we don't do it is because we have our own policies, we have our own line, and we never break with that line. Now, some people argue that we should, but I would say that would be quite unwise, right? So let's leave it at that. The second point is everyone who slept in bed with the Chinese, right, has always been stung. I think C. Raja Mohan had this wonderful line where he said, "I wish China upon my worst enemy." And that's very much the case. Like you sleep in bed with the Chinese, they are always going to come back and haunt you. The funny thing here is the Maldivians know this, right? Like they actually have had experience. Like if you remember, before the last Pro India government, before the last MDP government, I think it was Abdullah Yamin, if I'm not mistaken. Um, Look at the mess he got Maldives into, right? Who came and bailed them out? Who came and built the infrastructure without necessarily asking for a Shylockian pound of flesh from the Maldivians? Now, if the Maldivians think that their interests are going to be best served by electing someone who's going to mouth off at the Indians and pretend like geography isn't a factor, well, so be it. But all I'm saying is they shouldn't complain when the chickens come home to roost.
So yeah, let's now move to the other neighbors. We are done with the island neighbors. Yes, Venkat,
So I just
did you
wanted
want
to
to add?
make one point, just add to what you were saying, right? What he's saying is 100% true, right? I mean, the Chinese model of saddling countries with debt upon debt just leaves them in complete state of disarray, to the point that the Pakistanis, for example, today, who don't know where their next bag of atta is coming from, are done with the Chinese. There is more goodwill for India than there is for China and in most parts of Pakistan today, right? I mean, for a lot of purposes, they will still go to bed with the Chinese, because by definition they are a shameless lot. But they even the Pakistanis, who are sworn enemies of us, would actually, I mean, at least not the absolute crazies, want to sort of want better relations with India, just so that they can balance the Chinese. I mean, it's got to that point.
So yeah, before going to Pakistan and Bangladesh, which is like the perhaps the most consequential part of our neighborhood, let's first discuss Nepal and Bhutan. So Abhivardhan, we have been hearing, of course, Bhutan is officially we are not allies, but it has always been seen as a de facto ally, perhaps the most closest country to India in terms of relations. And of course Nepal, we have always had this bittersweet relations with Nepal. And Nepalese communist government a couple of years ago has tried to indulge Chinese a bit more than what they can chew, and of course what we would have hoped for beyond our tolerance level. And today again, like Sri Lanka, Nepalese government has also flipped, and the current government seems to be more pragmatic and more pro India. And they have understood the limitations of flirting with the Chinese a bit more. But still, is Nepal like Sri Lanka, or Nepal will continue to swing from one extreme to other extreme, depending on the government? And two, uh, what are, what is the status of this Bhutan negotiations? Should we be worried about Bhutan negotiations, or whatever negotiations Bhutan is doing with Chinese? Uh, I am assuming that it is going to be completely by keeping India in confidence. And what did you think about the Modi 2.0's approach towards these two countries? Because as we are discussing Modi 2.0 review. Yes,
Aditya, I
Abhivardhan.
just have one question slash to you and Abhivardhan, related to this, right? Can I just add that?
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
please.
sure, sure.
Yeah. So my question is fairly simple right now. You've seen a fairly imperialist China for almost 15 years now, right? If you were to take, let's say, the Beijing Olympics as the start of this expansionist China, right now, at least we are through 1.5 cycles of countries getting in bed with China, and then realizing that it is not what it's all made out to be, right? And then so my question is very simple, right? Not forget, I'm for a moment forget Bangladesh, Nepal, any country, right? Having seen this entire thing, why is there, I mean, there is a lot of India is a big bully, India is a big brother, kind of thing in our neighborhood also, right? But objectively, and I'm not saying this as an Indian, right? Objectively, the far more benign power in these two are India, right? And if you were to take that sort of position, right, why would anybody sort of take a hard turn towards China, such a hard turn as, let's say, the Maldives is taking, keep Pakistan out for very obvious reasons, right? Why would you take such a hard turn towards China when it stares in your face that the Chinese are what they are?
Venkat, this question is very important, and I will definitely take this question, but not in this segment. I have kept the China specific segment for in the neighborhood, like for the later part, maybe a couple of
Sorry,
10
sorry.
15 minutes
Go
later.
ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, but like, of course, I will keep this question in mind. But before that, Abhivardhan, can we get in with Nepal and Bhutan part?
Yeah, sure. Well, with Nepal, at least we know that um, the role of India and US has been very important to keep Nepal at bay, because we obviously know a section, Nepalese policy has been quite, jarring, and, you know, uh, and they have been disappointing at that. Of course, the Nepali elite also behaves in that delusional way. I think the problem is, like Venkat said, and I can add some aspects to it directly, not by getting into Maldives, because we have already talked a lot about Maldives. See, I think the reason why our neighboring countries behave like this, of course, in the beginning, I said that it's a Mexico syndrome. They will keep, you know, doing this, and they are going to China despite ignoring a benign India, has to do with aspects that certain countries which are small states, in my view, except Bhutan is not there yet, there because they are not a kingdom of sorts which is going to be ideologically mad or obscure. So leave Bhutan and even Bangladesh, because Sheikh Hasina is not going to be a mad prime minister or a leader of sorts, ideologically speaking. First of all, I think these Asian countries, these small Asian countries in the Indo-Pacific and the South Asian region, so-called, they really are trying to portray as if an ideological approach has been conducive and workable. And I think this is a kind of an understanding at their own level of strategic groupthink which is deluded. I think that's the best way to put it, because I mean, okay, fine, you can say that at a level of capacity and cooperation there might be certain things which India might not be doing, but still India's approach as a benign big daddy, in my view, as a civilizational big daddy in a good way, I hope it doesn't offend anyone's sensibilities. It has been very good, right? It's very productive, whether tourism, whether partnerships on education, whether people to people ties in certain ways. I think in that way, India's approach has been very, very reasonable. I don't think it's a necessary systemic flaw from our end, but we have to face the Mexico syndrome problem as it is, and I think they want to punch beyond their weight also. I think, which is what they should not do. I keep hearing these stories, for example, that people in Nepal, certain section of elite in Nepal, keeps bitching on India, while they know that they come to our universities, they participate in our activities, they have good relations with India, despite the fact that they keep abusing us and our people. And Nepalese are Nepalese, so congratulations to whosoever they are. I think it's a typical problem that, and it's kind of like a dilemma. They think that ideological bickering, bitching works. That's a bit informal way to put, but I put it. But I don't think that in ideological bitching is going to work with India, because India is not America and India is not Europe. So there, and it's a post-colonial dilemma also. A whole ideological stuff which comes up on the the reason they are radicalized and this comes up is basically a so-called post-colonial dilemma they have created. Which is kind of also a narrative of certain BRICS or certain SCO countries, but not the main countries like Iran or South Africa. They don't think like that, but certain countries in the so-called Eastern multilateral bodies or groupings like BRICS and SCO. It's just a mentality problem. But if you see India-led forums like International Solar Alliance, Sagar, or the Quad, whether I2, U2, or the Indo-Pacific Quad, you don't see such ideological leaning. Even the US is very common sense. And we don't need to talk about the Biden administration, but overall American establishment doesn't behave like that. So it's a change which these countries have not embraced. It's a strategic group thing which is deluded. It is stuck in one mindset. And yes, radicalization, money issues, of course, that has been happening for years. So yeah, I mean, we should be concerned about it, and I think we need to see how it goes. Yeah.
But what do you think about the? Of course, there is always a carrot and stick approach. I mean, among the stick approaches, we were quite strong in our stand that we won't cooperate with Nepalese in any aspect, especially with regards to projects that have been funded by China, right? Uh, and we have been quite we were quite strict about it. And finally, at least current Nepalese government has come around that idea and is trying to do what it can. But can we sustain this approach? Because at the end of the day, China is kind of like the second largest economy in the world. We cannot keep.
If I could just jump in very quickly.
Yes, I will finish the point, then I will let you in. My point is, because China is the second largest economy in the world, and even if you want to, you cannot ignore its economic cooperation with any other neighbor. Not only our neighbor, literally every country in the world, including India. So at what stage will we draw that line? Like, okay, this part of Chinese investments is allowed, but not this part. Like, are we being clear about it?
Okay, so before use finance ads, I'll just be very quick on investment. I think it's gonna be a practice approach because we know that the Asian Development Bank has had their own set of issues, and while relying on the East Tigers, which is to say ASEAN member states and Japan is one thing. I think India has to definitely up its game when it comes to investment circulation priorities. But of course, China-related investments, something I think in the multilateral fora and even in bilateral discussions and all the negotiations, New Delhi has been very clear. We will not be endorsing or we will not be supporting any Chinese investments, and we will not be supplementing them either. I think that has been happening even on the other strategic and defense aspects as well. So I think that's fine, but I think on investment, we need to come up with some minilateral solution, which is a better Indo-Pacific alternative as compared to the old Asia-Pacific approach, APEC approach, which has been very, very, sorry to say, hostile to India. And that's the truth. I mean, despite India's benign involvement, it has been hostile to India. So let's be honest on that. Yeah, and I think
yes, continue, please.
I just want to say, look, the point on Chinese economic power is well taken, and I don't think anyone is trying to play down the threat or say that it's irrelevant. But there's also something to realize that the Nepalis themselves, I mean to say the smaller states more broadly, but Nepal, because we're speaking about Nepal here, are also hedging, right? Like so to their political audiences, they're selling one story. But they know at the end of the day, when they sit down across the table with the Indians, they still have to keep in mind that if they cut this hand off, I mean, they're well and truly done. Because as much as people like to say that the 2015 blockade was a serious diplomatic disaster for India, and there were a lot of negative consequences of it, and so on and so forth, it at least underscored the sort of pain that could be applied if push came to shove and India had to make choices, right? And this was only further buttressed when the raw chief flew into Nepal, and very quickly after all of that, the Oli government basically fell, right? I'm not saying they're two unnecessarily linked, but it sent a very powerful message when he went there, and the entirety, I don't know how many of you were in like those Nepali elite circles talking about India, but it created quite a stir, right? Which is not to say on Twitter and places like that, but I'm talking even within their private circles. The message was quite clear here. And I think that is also another point that people don't talk about, because, well, we can't measure. Like as analysts, we can't sit on the table and be like, okay, what is India's covert influence? What is China's covert influence? What is Pakistan's covert influence within Nepal? But everyone who's followed the region long enough knows that push comes to shove, if Indians don't like something in Nepal, eventually it will fade away, right? Eventually it gets sorted out with. So I think even the Nepali elite who make decisions after a point know, okay, let's not needle India too much, right? Because it takes a lot for India to start flexing its muscles. But when it does flex its muscles, it is much more painful than what the CCP does. And also, let's not forget that the tyranny of geography still exists, right? I'm not denying that China has amazing industrial power. I'm not for a minute stating that we can match them, pound for pound when it comes to economic investments in Nepal. But I don't know, if they want to strap Xi Jinping onto a rocket and fire him into Nepal, and that's how they want to get aid in there. Okay, I mean, we'll see. But for the time being, even the Nepalis know that a rail link to India makes more sense than a rail link to China, right? Again, I'm not saying this in a derogatory fashion to look down upon certain jobs, but there is a huge section, and I don't think people understand this enough. There is a huge section of Nepal that is not seen on paper, but that does find everything from work all the way up to medical services in India. And I'm not saying wo Darjeeling ke area mein rehte hai. That's not what I'm talking about, right? I can tell you they come as far south as Maharashtra. I'm saying Maharashtra because it's like one of the more popular examples. In places like Pune or Mumbai, to work as everything from, again, I'm not making derogatory statements here, from watchman and cooking in certain Chinese restaurants, all the way up to what jobs that you would otherwise not consider to be at that stature, to put it mildly, right? I just want to make it once again very clear. I'm not looking down on anyone. But the reason I'm bringing this up is to show you that they are also integrally tied to India, right? The Chinese are not suddenly going to start importing, not importing, sorry, allowing thousands of Nepali workers into their economy to take their jobs, especially in the middle of an economic downturn, right? That's just not happening. And secondly, it would be much more profitable for Nepalis to come to India because there is still that cultural bond. And no matter what people say, I know people like to hand wave away this cultural bond. It does exist. A Nepali will feel a lot more comfortable coming into India, working with Indians, working alongside Indians, than he would having to spend, 10 years of his life learning Mandarin or Cantonese or one of the other dialects and having to settle down there, right? So I just wanted to put that point there. I'm sorry if it took a little more time than usual.
Yeah. I just wanted
I
you.
just have one question follow up to you and on this.
Yes. Yes. You can also follow up with the question, please, Pankaj.
Yeah. So the you was 100% right. He made an excellent point about people to people connect, and eventually that matters, right? My a more broad question and also a more specific question to both Nepal and, let's say, our closer neighborhood. India has always been sort of reticent, to splash the cash, as it were, right? And that is basically China's biggest USP, right? They just come and splash the cash. Now that cash comes with strings attached, and over a whatever 8, 10, 12 year period, people realize that, there is no free lunch and all of that. But eventually, that is possibly China's biggest USP. And also, as you and Abhi have pointed out, it's they are 6, 7 times our size in terms of an economy, and they will always have these things, right? Now, at least in certain important areas, my question to both you and Abhi, of course, there are domestic political issues to be balanced, right? Would it make sense for us, at least in, let's say, 1 or 2 areas, right? For example, in hydropower projects in Nepal, right? I'm just giving one example, right? Would it make sense for India to either use one of our state-sponsored capitalists, and we all know who they are, right? Or use government's cash itself, right? To basically, bring the house down, and sort of make offers that are too good to resist, right? Would that make sense? Of course, we cannot match them pound for pound in every area, in every industry, in every place, but at least in 1 or 2 areas, right? Would that make sense for India?
So I'm actually going to be controversial and praise the government for once, right? And I'm going to say that the government has realized this, and the ticket, the golden ticket, if I could paraphrase what you were saying, the golden ticket that they see is connectivity, right? Because they are closer to us. When I say they, I'm referring to our neighborhood, so specifically Bangladesh and specifically Nepal, because they are closer to us. We want to build more connectivity links to them. So I'm sure Aditya will cover this when we come to Bangladesh. But there are railway lines heading into Bangladesh, for instance, and there's been a lot of fanfare about the fact that they're being reconnected. That's for a reason, because the electricity projects that are coming up between Nepal, India, and Bangladesh is another example. The reason the Indian government is now more keen than they were to pursue these projects is because the investment is at a sweet spot for India, number one. Number two, it ties these countries into India's economy, if you will, right? And number three, it bolsters the people to people connect we were talking about even more. And when you layer all these three things on top of one another, it makes for a very powerful force multiplier, speaking in terms of influence. So this is one area I know, at least in our neighborhood, that the Indian government is pursuing more aggressively. And I'll just say this one small thing before ending. I'm very glad you brought this point up, because I don't think people understand this enough, right? Yes, we do speak of the power that the Chinese have in terms of ability to splash funds, no doubt about it. But people also need to realize that just splashing money doesn't necessarily mean you will always be able to build influence over time, right? Like if there is a country like India that is comparatively spending less, but is spending in the right areas and is at least achieving results such that those economies are being tied to its economy. And when I say tied, I don't mean in like the strictly financial sense. I mean like literally tied to India through electricity, through waterways, through railway lines. It has a much stronger effect. And that often gets underplayed, especially on social media, because as usual, everyone wants to get like their everyone wants to say the most rage baity things, so they get the most likes and the most retweets. But I think this point is slightly underappreciated. I don't want to over labor it, because again, you have to respect Chinese economic muscle, but I just want everyone to keep this in mind when they think about the problem.
Yeah. When I come to the China part, I will cover about India's capacity or ability to splurge the money. It will be there in like one or two section after perhaps the Pakistan and Bangladesh section. But now I would like to come to Bhutan. Now, see, the only major foreign policy concern or per se the matter that, of course, on the non-security dimension, it is as good as it can get with Bhutan. So there are no concerns there. But the major concern has always been with regards to Bhutan for India has been the how the border works, like the border areas work in our favor, and how the situations have evolved since the 2017 Doklam standoffs. Now, Abhivardhan, there have been numerous reports about like Bhutan uh, being in negotiations with China over border, and since 2017 standoff we have also after 2017 standoff we have also seen, of course it's not near Bhutan, but also the uh, on the Ladakh region, the major standoff between India and China. So on in this context, how would you see Bhutan being part of border negotiations with China, and what involvement do you think New Delhi has on this, and what are the terms New Delhi will be open to, or is it open to any terms? Like what has been the Modi 2.0 approach with regards to Bhutan China equation after especially 2017 Doklam standoff?
Okay, one problem has been about, of course, after Doklam and even after Galwan, is that I think reports have been coming that, in the northern section of Bhutan, which is bordering, Tibet or China, Tibet part of China. Of course, there have been reports that, the Chinese have been building some installations and of stuff. And, there have been photos about it, and they could be accordingly verified and understood. But that's one thing. So, of course, the concern is huge. See, one thing is that from a capacity point of view, the Bhutanese people will have a problem, the kingdom will have a problem, and they have to face this harsh reality. Now, Modi 2.0 has been very successful in at least in terms of major development and connectivity aspects of cooperation, like hydropower projects like Punat Sangchu 1, 2, Tala, and others. In trade and connectivity, also Bhutan and Assam have been connecting pretty well under the BBIN understanding, which is the BBIN initiative. Even the Council for Strategic and Defense Relations always talks about BBIN because that connects India's northeast, it connects Bangladesh, it connects Bhutan, and that's a very good thing for Guwahati, you know, as a capital of Assam. So even on regional connectivity and trade, I think with Bhutan we have been doing pretty well, which is like a 58-kilometer cross-border rail link between Jelefu, which is in Bhutan, Gelefu, and Kokrajhar in Assam. So that's good. A second link is also being explored between two places in Bhutan and therefore Assam. So that's one thing. Culturally, I don't wish to get on that. Also, development initiatives have been fine. Okay, on all development initiatives, whether having a special economic zone or having an international airport, I think on those aspects, India has been very, very quick, which is great. On the military and defense aspects, I'm not good at it, but I'll just say that uh, how much will our establishment decide to, you know, take into concern, the parts which have already been subject to so-called involvement and intrusion by the Chinese in northern part of Bhutan. I think that is something which should concern, but I think use may add better on the security side. I'll just say from a strategic point of view, at least from a development economics, and is that I think even on the Siliguri corridor, I think, and the development initiatives, I think India has been doing pretty much well, which is great for the Mekong Ganga Cooperation Initiative overall. So I think that's perfectly fine. But it has to be seen how much time it would take for the relevant, I would say, land level security risks that must be emerging from North Bhutan and otherwise. So that's my understanding, but I think Yus may add better on the security standpoint.
So did we do enough to take Bhutanese into confidence with regards to the security situations in their border region? And what is the red line and what is the level of Indian establishment involvement? Of course, India will be involved because that is how Bhutanese foreign policy involved. But what is the level that Indian establishment will allow for Bhutanese to negotiate with the Chinese? Because I think they are taking up with the, of course, it's a decades long thing. It has always happened. Then nothing went forward, and Chinese always have kept on pressuring Bhutan. But yeah, yes, please.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
So just one quick question I just wanted to add, right? Just to rephrase what you said, and just for my own knowledge, right? In other words, I just wanted to understand what is the leverage that we have over Bhutan to sort of bend them to our will. I just don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about this topic. I'm just curious to learn, right? What is the, yes, the soft power again? I mean, maybe not to the extent of Nepal, but again, people to people contact and so on and so forth has always been there. But I'm just curious to understand what is the hard leverage that we have over Bhutan.
okay, this is going to be impolite, but I think it will sort of summarize the point up quite well. The leverages will make them another Sikkim. Right. I mean, I'm not saying this for like effect or anything. I mean, I literally mean that. Like, the leverage is you're too small, and if you act too smart, we'll do what we did to Sikkim. Right. I'm talking about the kingdom of Sikkim. I don't mean like literally that. And the reason I say this with quite a bit of responsibility is because so right now the situation is a little tricky, right? So what's happening is the Chinese are for a fact sitting on Bhutanese land. You had a question, Venkat?
Yeah, so I just had a question on this, right? Do you think you're saying that we could make them a Sikkim, right? I mean, two questions, right? First, do you think this is even a serious, uh, let's say, point or order of thinking inside our strategic community, both within and outside the government? Point number one. Point number two, does the political? I mean, I don't think we are anywhere near that today, but does the political establishment have that kind of appetite for such a huge political risk?
No, so
If
that's
it
where
comes
it's
to that.
different. So that's where it's different, right? So the leverage we have, so in the back of their minds, they always know that we're a bigger military power, right? And if too many buttons are pushed, you never know when you go to Sikkim route. So that's in the back of their mind. But in reality, that doesn't occur for two primary reasons. Number one, because that fact is well recognized, the Bhutanese always stay on side with India, right? If you've noticed in the long history, they've never taken explicit as anti-India of a stance as say the Nepalis have from time to time. And oh, sorry, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought for 1 second. And the second point is no, that is not India's risk appetite. We don't have that risk appetite. We behave very differently, and especially on Bhutan, I can say that we rely a lot more on diplomacy than any hard power, and that's generally the direction Indian foreign policy takes. Diplomacy is always preferred over application of what you would typically consider to be hard kinetic power. But specifically on Bhutan, I mean, I have a bunch of considerations, and I understand I may differ from the consensus on this slightly because of my hawkish leanings. But number one, the Chinese are sitting on Bhutanese lands, right? No matter what happens on social media, we know that for a fact through satellite imagery. Number two, they're getting the danger here is that they will continue to get closer and closer because we all know how the CCP behaves when it comes to salami slicing. Number three, we are bound by our infrastructure development in the region. I mean, it's basically non-existent, and even within Bhutan, it's going to be very hard push comes to shove to quote unquote take back those lands or protect from further salami slicing, unless some major escalation happens. Which brings me to number four: the only leverage as we currently from where we currently sitting, right, is some kind of major escalation from our side along the current existing LAC, which I don't think is really going to happen, given that all signals from the GOI at this point is, yes, we will take a firm stance against any CCP aggression at the LAC, but we will not specifically ramp things up from our end. We will not reverse the salami slice, if you catch my drift. And that's why my concern is, because this sort of leaves us in a catch-22, right? Damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you just sit by and watch it happen, I mean, we can be reasonably certain that this is only going to continue. But even if we do try and exercise our power, do we have the capabilities necessary to hem them in? So at this point, I think, to be quite blunt with you, it's a capability race. I think what's happening is the GOI is trying to buy time. We're trying to speed up our own defense procurement, production, and R&D efforts. Some of which are, I can tell you, it's an absolute dumpster fire, but that's a different conversation. And that in that time, I think we're hoping to build up at least, if not full parity, at least a degree of deterrence that will prevent further expansionism. I don't know so much about whether we intend to take back those lands or not, because again, that's a sensitive conversation. That's a whole other conversation. But those are just, I'm much more pessimistic about what's happening in Bhutan than perhaps most other people.
Yes, now let's get to the final two neighbors. No, three neighbors actually. I don't know if we want to cover Afghanistan, but of course, when we discuss Pakistan, I think Afghanistan will automatically be covered. So let's get to the first Bangladesh. Abhivardhan? Oh, of course, Rishabh has joined us. So, Rishabh.
We should start with Rishabh when it comes to
yeah,
Bangladesh and Pakistan.
yeah,
But
yeah.
that's yeah.
Yeah. So, Rishabh, what do you think our, especially Modi 2.0 has been with Bangladesh? I personally think it has been quite steady under Sheikh Hasina with Bangladesh for last 5 years. Of course, there were some concerns regarding our domestic standpoint with regards to CAA and all in the initial periods of Modi 2.0. And from their domestic constituents, of course, Bangladesh opposition has been putting quite pressure on Bangladesh establishment, and of course there have been quite regime change, if not at the like very strong efforts, but some level of in regime change indications from the U.S. establishment, etc., through visa pressures, diplomatic pressures, etc., and all. But by and large, I personally think Modi 2.0, it was the status quo with the Bangladesh, and recent elections kind of just confirms it. But I think more risks will start from now, especially how the Bangladesh public will take the new term of Sheikh Hasina. But yes, Rishabh, you will be better to, you will be the best person to expand on that. Yes, please.
Am I audible?
Of course, yes.
Hi everyone. So uh, I think overall it's been, as you said, it's been a more stable. I think in the recent years, especially I think in the mid to 2010s, for example, around 2016 or 17, there was a slight change in orientation in Bangladesh, which many people saw as Sheikh Hasina trying to reach out to China, and this was consolidated through deals in the energy sector, some obviously defense deal, etc. And for a lot of people, this raised alarm about Bangladesh trying to diversify its portfolio in many ways. But I think New Delhi played it safe and understood. I think the idea for many of us, I think something which we haven't come to terms with, is that you cannot have a South Asia where China is not present, or where you essentially have a scenario where most countries, especially countries like Bangladesh, which do need China for many reasons, right, will not essentially move away from China just because of our past history, our past ties, etc. Bhutan, obviously, as you pointed out, it's a very different case. I would say it's the most special relationship we have with any other country in South Asia. So I think my point, just to go back, was about how in the last 5 years, especially after the 2019 elections, the focus has been to stabilize the relationship. I don't think that the government has been very successful in. The government has been very kind to Bangladesh, um, but I don't think the government has been very successful in terms of strengthening our defense relationship. China has, for example, I mean, still consolidates a lot, has consolidated a lot on the defense relationship, not just in terms of sales, but other things as well. So I think that's one place where I think we haven't done very well. At the same time, I think a lot of people in India are very critical of Sheikh Hasina. I keep reading this on the margins, obviously, about how Sheikh Hasina is not very stringent or strict on the Islamist forces, not just on the BNP side, but on her own side. And obviously, this comes from mostly the Hindu right in India, which is I understand where they come from in terms of the persecution that the larger minorities face. But I think what people has to understand is to actually see what's the alternative there, and and acknowledge the fact that there are always political compulsions for, even somebody like Sheikh Hasina, who's seen to be very publicly secular, etc. So obviously there are some ideological issues where I think Sheikh Hasina might have to take more, some have to do might have to take some public stances or do some posturing. If, for example, there is some ugly rhetoric from India, I don't think there has been, too much of that in recent years. I obviously will not take, too much of social media discussion very seriously, but I think the last few years have been all about consolidating relationships, and I think we have seen, even in the last couple of years, many people think that, whatever the pressure that has been building up on Dhaka from the US is a more recent phenomena. It's actually not. People who have been following the whole thing know that this goes back almost 2.5 years, not something which has started in the last 6 months or whatever. So I think India has put its foot down in the sense that, it supports Sheikh Hasina. Obviously, it has a preference. That obviously doesn't translate into official backing of the prime minister. But I think you're right in the sense that the more challenging times are ahead. Because if, for example, the United States keeps doing what it's doing, I think, Sheikh Hasina will probably have some incentive to balance out that particular pressure, and that may lead to uh, maybe some small policy shifts. Although I would say that Bangladesh under Sheikh Hasina has always maintained, a very, principled equidistance, from both. I mean, maintaining relationships between India and China also, and maintaining and keeping a distance from both the superpowers or major powers in the region. I would say, in Bangladesh is probably better at non-alignment than we ever have been, and it actually practices a more purist or Puritan version of the same. Uh, so in my opinion, I think yes, there are going to be challenges. There could be some challenges in terms of public sentiment, something very similar to what we are seeing probably in Maldives. uh, but obviously Maldives is a very small case study. Bangladesh is a much more serious problem there, and it's true that in many cases there is not a lot of goodwill in many sections of Bangladeshi society about India. That's absolutely true. People who deny that are living in, in La La Land, and it's not always, by the way, based on religious. It's not based on religious fault lines always, by the way. So it's true that, India is seen as a backer of Sheikh Hasina, but I'll be very honest. I India publicly doesn't come out and support, uh, uh, doesn't come out with supporting her in any way. If you ask people, outside public forums, and there are people who anonymously will tell you how India backs Sheikh Hasina. Obviously, do remember one thing, that the Bangladeshi military, right, is not as bad as Pakistani military, but it still plays a huge role when it comes to brokering deals within the political forces in Bangladesh. So if there is any threat to Sheikh Hasina, it will come from the military. But Sheikh Hasina is smart enough, and she's traversed the domestic politics in such a way that she's been able to buy off a large part of the or essentially pacify whatever the problems were. So Bangladesh army is also very good at negotiating with the political forces in the country. And Sheikh Hasina, through defense deal, keeping the people. I mean, again, I'm not saying Bangladesh army is just like the Pakistani army, as corrupt, etc. It's not as corrupt. I mean, it is corrupt in many ways, but it's not as powerful. or it has come to an understanding with the political establishment, especially the current establishment. And India, by the way, maintains a lot of goodwill, or at least has maintained good relationship with the Bangladeshi military as well. So India doesn't have to do much. Contrary to public opinion, India is, raw is doesn't have. I mean, it may have operations, etc. But raw is not the one who is, doing all these shady things behind the scene to somehow, prop her up during elections. I think people don't have an idea about how much Awami League, how much state power it has currently, right? It is essentially a party state. uh, and India doesn't have to do anything. The point which India essentially is trying to make, and is kind of not being successful at it, is that they don't want to interfere. Whatever the course of Bangladeshi politics is, it want to essentially let it be. Similar thing cannot be said about the United States of America. And this is not just because of the usual skepticism that we have towards America. In the case of Bangladesh, there is actual concern. So I think the biggest problem for India-Bangladesh relation is not any discernible shift in Sheikh Hasina's policy. I don't think that will be the case, at least in the next immediate future. It will probably, the challenge may emerge if there are divergences between Delhi and DC. So I think that is my general estimation. Obviously, there are multiple factors here, but I think we have to kind of accept that South Asia is not, or the entire Indian Ocean region in general, we will face more contestation, and it might not be seen as always a bad thing, because as you guys were talking, I was just listening briefly about Nepal and others, and as I've said before, no country is being able, it's not as if we are not able to have total hegemony like before. It's not as if China is doing the same, or if China is successful in doing the same. That's not the case. So I think we need to be a bit more pragmatic, and understanding that with political changes, there will be some challenges, there will be some rhetoric. Small nations, and imagine how we react when the United States or some other country, external major power, is seen as interfering, right? So similar reactions you will be coming from smaller nations as well. I mean, you saw the Maldivian minister say something similar, right? That we are a small island, but don't bully us, whatever. Sometimes it's also public posturing, but at the same time, I do feel that whatever is happening between Maldives and India, or whatever is happening between India, or what happened with India and Sri Lanka, was absolutely different from what's happening with India, Bhutan, China. That's a much more bigger problem, where I think we are probably at a better footing than, let's say, and that's obviously a more serious concern because it's right at our border. So yeah, I mean, Bangladesh, in terms of defense relationship, I think we could do more. We have to push the Bangladeshis to essentially buy more of our equipment, which I don't think we've been able to do. But otherwise, I think we've been fairly generous on Bangladesh, and Sheikh Hasina knows it.
So, Abhivardhan, one aspect of our relationship that has been really good was basically the connectivity, basically regional integration. And Bangladesh has been a big story about that, like railway connectivity, power grid corporations, or larger talk about expanding more trade ties, deepening it further. So, eh, Bangladesh is the key story in addition to Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Nepal, that has been leading to many saying that perhaps in the next 5-10 years we can actually have some level of a regional. Of course there is a BIMSTEC, BBIN, but like more deeper, if not at the level of EU, maybe at the level of ASEAN, like. So on that regard we have done quite well, I assume, is under Modi, Jaishankar foreign policy. Of course, this aspect also needs involvement of our other ministries like finance ministry, transportation, other cabinet
Yeah,
ministries. But
yeah, yeah. Okay. So, as I said in the previous portions, that see, one aspect we have to remember, and I keep talking about this. I know that sometimes it seems repetitive, but when India is inching on the concept of the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific subcontinent or South Asian region, economic cooperation, connectivity, and even other aspects and all. I think between Akhora and Agartala, which is a cross-border, rail link, which is supported by our side, which is from India, and then of course there are power projects and other things coming up. Then again, even in startup cooperation under the G20 presidency, you know, some work was continued forward, so that's also great. And like internationalization. So yes, kind of like an ASEAN like approach could be helpful, because I think it's a good opportunity for the coming half decade or decade, let us say, to go to that level for Modi 3.0 if it's see, and ensure that with Bangladesh we create a better economic cooperation and is not in a situation which is just mired or completely dislocated like others. And I think the Mexico syndrome, as Rishabh rightly also been reacting accordingly, I think that will keep happening. But yeah, uh, I think because the point is that funnily when Asia Pacific, India and Bangladesh were excluded from that in a larger context, right? I mean, yes, of course, in trade and other aspects we were integrated, but the conceptual and the larger understanding, even in investment governance and all. I mean, despite Indian and Bangladeshi people coming up and companies coming up, India was and Bangladesh were not comprehensively involved, I would say. So I think even on the investment side, I say, and I'm not talking on security. On the investment side, I mean, is that and the in development cooperation, I think India is the big daddy and has to lead some way as a maybe an alternative to the Asian Development Bank or something like that. And I think Hughes rightly pointed out, I think Hughes or Venkat, that we have our state-sponsored companies and so forth and entities who should try to do that strategically. In telecom, we have started doing already. Airtel has been across Sri Lanka, across certain parts in Africa, even in Bangladesh, if I'm right. So in telecom, we see it. In other sectors and aspects of core investment, we should try. Yeah.
So just sorry to just one point, small point, which I think I missed out. I think one concern for India and Bangladesh would be not essentially will be about the succession related to Sheikh Hasina, essentially. I mean, I know many people have been asking uh, what next or who after Sheikh Hasina, which is an important question nonetheless. But I would say more importantly, uh, people, I mean, some of us have to also close attention to Bangladeshi politics in general. I think sometimes, I think in a lot of our discussions and debates, we focus on the grand, conceptions and theories and whatnot, but we somehow miss to, when you're talking about Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific, all that is great. And trust me, I also, I also study Indo-Pacific in great detail and whatnot. But at the same time, I think somehow we kind of forget that, sometimes uh, more than whether we will join, how much will we lend support to the to America and other quad allies if there is a conflict in Taiwan, let's say, right? More than, for example, what is India's South China Sea policy and what is a maritime strategy. I think we also need to focus on what's happening to the countries around us. Sometimes somehow we miss all that. I don't see many discussions about what's happening domestically. And I know a lot of people a bit dismissive about the fact that India doesn't need to. I mean, India is the as you pointed out, India is a big daddy in South Asia, and Pakistan. We've left Pakistan behind. It's in the rearview mirror. I don't think that's the right way for us to be looking at things, because not everything is done and dusted. uh, the competition in South Asia is just beginning. So for us, it's also important to prioritize. Many people were more concerned and more, awakened by whether India will join any military pact or a military, operation in Taiwan. I don't think that should be the main. I mean, that's also important. Don't get me wrong. That has consequences and second order effects on obviously India. But I saw very how people discussed potential changes in Bangladesh, or the fact that they did not discuss it at all, also says something very interesting about how we view our own security. So I think we need to prioritize those things first, and that I think would come from more public discussion or more public interest in what's happening within these countries, which go beyond the scope of religious extremism and religious fault lines. I think that's very important, because if we don't understand the domestic aspects of these countries, the domestic politics, civil military relations, then I think we're just talking about things in a much vague, much broader sense, but more often very vague and directionless. So in the public discourse, I think we also need to focus on things which immediately affect our security. uh, so talking about Taiwan is fine, right? Talking about Quad and South China Sea is fine, but at the same time, you have to look at closely on what effects, what effects will be there for India if there is a government change in Bangladesh. That thankfully did not happen, but obviously never say never. And similar things have happened in Maldives, and it's a small country, so we probably don't care as much. But imagine if the same happened in Bangladesh. I think people are really misunderstanding or underplaying the impact of that.
Yes. Yes. The last question on Bangladesh before we go to the other side of the neighborhood. That is, of course, I think the time is running out, but we will try to cover it fast. Uh, was it okay on part of Modi Jaishankar to keep all the basket, all our eggs in one basket? That is Sheikh Hasina. Should we be trying to uh, build the bridge with the other side in Bangladesh going forward? Because we are quite unsure who will succeed Sheikh Hasina. So we have to be quite prepared for that. Right now, everyone says, okay, we should not be doing this and that because the other side happens, then the Jamaat-e Islami will get the power and it is going to be catastrophic, etc., etc. But I guess we should be building the bridges with the opposition, right? I mean, of course,
Uh,
till the time Hasina existed, it was quite safe for us to put all the eggs in her basket. But I guess this will be most likely her last term. So yes, yes.
Look, I have quite a strong opinion on this, which may slightly digress from the not the consensus, but other opinions that state that we do need to have a dialogue with the BNP. Like we actually did have a dialogue with the BNP, if I remember correctly, under the Vajpayee administration. Brijesh Mishra was, I think, trying to use them to balance out the Awami League at the time. A little sketchy on the details. I'll have to read up and get back to you. But it's not unheard of that we have talked to the BNP or we've tried to build bridges with them. But I will always maintain that at this point in time, trying to build bridges to the BNP and the Jamaat is literally opening your floodgates up to the barbarians, right? Like I can look, there's that line from Zero Dark 30, like I know uncertainty freaks you out, but 100%, right? And that's how I feel about the BNP. Like, yes, it freaks everyone out, but if you do allow them, I won't say allow them, if you do facilitate the rise to power, right? If you do build those bridges with them, it will have a direct impact in West Bengal. And I don't think people understand how far gone a lot of the areas between the Bengal and the Bangladeshi border already has gone. Right, like you step foot in there, and you look at sort of the demographic realities that is sweeping that region, and very quickly you start to realize what would happen if you brought the BNP plus Jamaat to power. Because no matter, and I often split with the Hindu right on this, no matter how much you hate uh, the Awami League and Sheikh Hasina and her need to balance out um, the Islamist elements by also sort of pandering to them, the BNP and the Jamaat will be like 100 times worse. Like there's no sort of comparison here. I mean, there's a league of difference.
But use if it's inevitable or suppose.
No, so I don't think it's inevitable. I genuinely don't think it's inevitable. I don't think the Awami League just sort of like combusts into flames and then just dissolves within like a term or two.
I am not saying from that perspective. I'm just saying at some point government will change, right? Basically, it's
yeah, and okay. So if the viewpoint is governments change, I agree. You can have a limited engagement with the BNP such that you try and limit fallout into India, right? But what I'm saying is, in my assessment, in my very frank and honest assessment, uh, the day BNP comes to power, India will find out firsthand what happens when the Jamaat rules Bangladesh. And whatever the issues we have with illegal migration, even with terrorism, I would argue, in the region, all of that is going to spike through the roof, right? Because a lot of people don't understand just how radical the BNP plus Jamaat have gotten. And I keep saying BNP plus Jamaat because people try and find a split between them, but they are connected in multiple places. They have a very strong lobbying wing within DC. They have, for some reason, managed to convince Americans that they are the better bet, primarily because they are going to go along with America's anti-CCP stance. But this is a major problem for India because we always have to keep an anti-BNP, anti-Jamaat option open. If it means creating it, right, so be it. Pour in the funds and create it. But I very strongly believe that if we elevate the BNP plus Jamaat, it's going to be catastrophic for our border.
I think what Aditya is saying, I get what you're saying, and I think you're not the first person to say this. I have read this time arguments many times before, and it sounds like it's a foreign policy. It's like a pearl of wisdom of sorts. That why burn bridges? Why keep or position yourself as being seen as backing only one horse, right? Being seen as partisan in their domestic affairs. And you're right that there is a cost to it. I'm not saying that there isn't, but my point here and my counterfactual to you and anybody who makes this argument is that, let's say, for example, you have a ruler in any country, right, for that matter, or a regime which has absolute total grip on power at the moment, right? And as you pointed out, and anybody who's following Bangladesh politics would know, it's actually, BNP is hollowed out to a large extent. BNP is actually not pushing the opposition side. BNP, it's actually the street power which the BNP is exercising is actually coming from Jamaat. But anyways, not digressing from the main point. The essential point here is that if you have a regime that is solidly in place, right? If you try and reach out, or if you go beyond a certain point in terms of building bridges with the opposition, right? There could be a cost to it, especially if there's a very delicate balancing being done from your side when it comes to, you know, getting assurances from the said country about, fending off, let's say in this case, the Chinese, or not interacting with the Chinese or aligning with the Chinese after a certain point. So you have to be very careful when you start to initiate bridges. India, by the way, if India can talk to the Taliban, India can talk to the Jamaat as well. But imagine making that point in early 2010 when the Taliban is explicitly against India, more so, not ideologically alone, more so because it relies heavily on Pakistani support. Now, a lot of people in 2019 and 2021, specifically when Americans left Afghanistan, the argument was made, and I read about this, a lot. The argument was made that, did India get anything wrong? And the essential, point that all these people made was that, oh, if only if we had been more flexible in the early years by reaching out to the Taliban and not just aligning ourselves with the government in Kabul, then maybe we would have had some goodwill in Afghanistan with the Taliban, and maybe we would not, be left in this situation. Essentially, now that we are seeing, like, having our bag in the hand, and we're essentially empty-handed, so to speak, right? We've totally lost Afghanistan to not just the Taliban but Pakistan itself. So it's easy to say these generic things that, oh, don't keep your eggs in one basket, but you have to understand who is holding that basket in that country at that moment of time, and what is the cost of reaching out to the other side, uh you know in terms of, the timeline or what the current political situation is. So I'm all for building bridges. In fact, I would say the biggest the in for India, the bigger challenge is to keep some amount of goodwill, to enhance goodwill in those countries amongst the civil society, amongst its people. One place where, I'll tell you, in my opinion, where the current Maldives government will find themselves, falling short, after the point they will not be able to exercise or, implement these anti-India policies, because there is a lot of goodwill for India, in favor of India, right? So they will find a problem there. Similar thing cannot be said about the Bangladeshi public sentiment, which goes against us or has gone against us in many ways. But my argument here is to not reach out. Again, Bangladeshi sentiment or a section of Bangladeshi public being seen or seeing India in a more hostile fashion does not necessarily mean that that sentiment comes from being pro BNP or pro Jamaat, right? Those could be other things also. So my essential point is, you're right. We should try to maintain relationships, but what do we do with them, or how far should we go, that has to be calibrated based on the domestic politics or dynamics of that country. So it's not about when, how much, when we reach out. It's not about whether we reach out or not. Obviously we do reach out, but we will decide when to reach out and how much to reach out based on what we perceive to be the current dynamics in that country. And right now, I would say, as you pointed out, the power is totally in Awami League's favor. BNP doesn't exist.
Yeah. Now, sorry, I forgot before going to Pakistan, I forgot another neighbor, that is Myanmar. If anyone wants to summarize, like, how has our relations been under Modi 2.0 with Myanmar, because there has been a military regime in Myanmar when Modi 2.0 was happening, and there has been quite a domestic implications we are seeing.
Aditya, just very quickly, I'm sorry I'm interjecting, but maybe you should club your the Myanmar topic with the China thing, because it'll actually segue very well into what China's doing there as well.
Then maybe perhaps the next topic would be on the Southeast Asia, China, East Asia, larger
Yeah,
Indo-Pacific.
that would probably be better.
Then we can have Myanmar. Then we can then finish the segment with Pakistan and Afghanistan. Then, because it's already been 1.5 hours since we have started. So yeah, of course we always have more to discuss. So I think we will end with this section, that is Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I think we should discuss that together because it's kind of mostly connected also. Now, under Modi 2.0, we have seen quite a fluctuation of India and our Western neighbor relations, in the sense that there was, of course, Article 370, and after that, for a couple of years, we had we had Imran Khan, who earlier, many reports said, tried to reach out to India during Balakot and all, but after 370, he took very strong stance, and of course, whole Pakistan establishment took strong stance. Then, of course, there was a perceived victory of Pakistan through Taliban's victory in Afghanistan in 2021, and everyone was too premature to judge their victory or ISI's complete grip on it. And then we have seen the swing to other extreme in the last 3 years, that is internal contradictions between Taliban and Pakistan play out, and there have been back channel reach out between Indian establishment and Pakistani establishment. There was uh, I think they reiterated the ceasefire agreement, and there has been quite a muted border. But again, in the last few months, and in the there has been revival in the ceasefire violations to an extent, and we have seen few terror attack revivals in Kashmir in the last few months. So I'm not sure if the ceasefire has been respected from the Pakistan establishment side. But then, in addition to this, we have seen Imran Khan going out, Pakistani military as always showing their supremacy. Then, of course, now Nawaz Sharif is back, and everyone is expecting, or not expecting, it is almost done deal that he will be the next prime minister in February, March. That is if elections happen as they have said. So through all this varied swings, I think we were quite calm. We have been quite consistent in our policy that we won't at least concede any ground to them, despite different voices saying so. Uh, we have mostly played wait and watch policy with regards to Pakistan. Of course, I don't know how much of the report saying we have been like lot of the anti-India elements in Pakistan and outside have been killed by RAW and our security establishment. I don't know how true is that, including inside Pakistan. But keeping all that said, I think this is one aspect of a relationship that has been pretty consistently in favor of us use. Anyone wants to take it up this? I think I have summarized how the last 5 years of Modi 2.0 went with Pakistan and Afghanistan, but use, let's start with you.
I'm sorry, you distorted the last bit on my end. What was your end question?
No, I just said like India has everything. I mean, of course, apart from the small period where Afghanistan's victory, during that period, it seemed like everything was going against India in the region. And it seemed like Pakistani security establishment has consolidated its grip. But even that didn't seem to be true few months later. So it has been quite consistently quite a good period for India when it comes to Pakistan and Afghanistan in terms of security and other relations.
I mean, broadly speaking, yes. If you look at security-related incidents, not in the Kashmir area, definitely much better on that side compared to, say, I don't know, UPA 2. But there are a couple of points that need to be flagged, right? Like, just to set the context. Number one, what we are seeing in Kashmir right now is what a lot of experienced security people within the national security circles always expected, which is, excuse me, which is a rebranding, right? So what's happened is the LET and the JEM have basically rebranded. They've chosen a specific sector that's where the terrain is much harsher, where it makes much more sense to where they are allowed to operate much more freely due to terrain compulsions. They have started this activity at a time where a lot of Indian troops were shifted to Ladakh. It also comes in the afterglow, sorry, not the afterglow, the aftermath of the revocation or the nullification of Article 370. And it is different in the sense that it's a lot more PR focused. So the attacks often come loaded with a whole host of PR stunts linked to it. I'm not saying it was these PR stunts, if you will, weren't seen with other attacks, but they are definitely more refined than they were compared to some of the other attacks we've seen before. I hear a lot of people say that they are specially trained or they're better trained, but I mean, I think you can compare them quite well to the BAT teams we used to see back when it used to really kick off between India and Pakistan. So this is an important factor to keep in mind, and we are launching an operation. I think KNI has already announced it. It's basically Sarpa Vinash 2.0. I forget the exact name of the operation because I literally remember it as Sarpa Vinash 2.0, but it's bigger. So that's like one point to keep in mind. The second point to keep in mind is even though the Pakistanis will overtly deny that they have anything to do with this, they very much have everything to do with it. I mean, literally anyone who follows India and Pakistan will tell you that unless the Pakistani ISI and quite a few elements within the ISI, let me put it that way, are helping the JEM, the LET, they will not be able to carry out such attacks. The logistics all come from their end, and the PR stunts that you see, you can tell they're being refined by people who aren't exactly country bumpkins from Punjab. right? I'm talking about Pakistani Punjab. The second important point I'd like to bring up is even though there's been a lot of talk of peace, I think maybe Rishabh can talk about this because he follows the civil side of relations the non-military side of relations much more closely in Pakistan. Uh, I think sort of what Imran Khan did was play spoilsport in that whatever overtures Bajwa did want to push, Imran Khan sort of spoiled, even if he may have been on board at one point in time. That's the second point. And the third point, and I'll end with this point. Um, the Pakistan can increasingly be used by China to put pressure on us. I know this sounds like very conspiratorial, but it is very slowly happening, especially when you look at sort of the J31 announcements and things like that. I know people want to hand wave these things away, but it's becoming an increasing reality, especially given the terrain that separates the LOC. If we are not careful, this spirals out of control rather rapidly. And in a situation where the LSE does hot up very rapidly, it wouldn't be too shocking to see the Pakistanis also play up at least the asymmetrical threats in the neighborhood. So from this angle, I would say that the relationship with Pakistan. Just excuse me one second.
Yeah,
Both
Abhivardhan, before going to Rishabh on the civil aspects, I would like your comment on one aspect that India has been quite successful. I think perhaps most transformational in terms of at least
hello.
perception.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Aditya. I'm just back. I just concluded. So the third aspect, I just wanted to finish with this. The third aspect that Indian policymakers need to keep in mind is even though the Pakistanis may sing the tune of peace now, it's going to be anything but. I mean, I think both sides of the aisle know this at this point. It's an opportunity to catch their breath and prepare for what's inevitably heading our way.
Yeah, Abhivardhan, one aspect, at least in terms of perception, if not in terms of effective ground reality, perception wise, the Modi 2.0 has been very consequential and transformational in the strategic outlook that whenever India, anyone basically, not only in India, even outside, basically everyone, whenever they used to talk about Indian foreign policy and security outlook, they would always start with Pakistan. Of course, China, but Pakistan. Like that dehyphenation of Pakistan from larger Indian strategic outlook, Indian foreign policy outlook. I think, at least in terms of perception, that has been the most consequential part vis-a-vis Pakistan in Modi 2.0. Would you like to expand on that, Abhivardhan?
So I'll be very quick on that. When it comes to a global perspective, I think, of course, that has shifted. Although there are sections of commentators and people who will always talk about the India-Pakistan border situation and the history of the two nation theory and blah blah blah. That will keep happening. Nobody can stop that. But of course, the concept of a new India where digital India and all these initiatives are taking shape, and we are seeing some important impetus when it comes to Indian leadership and not the Vishwaguru nightmare thing, which is not true. And I'm glad that we don't promote that way. It's just the Indian influencers on YouTube who do it. I think the de-hyphenation is starting now. It wasn't before. It wasn't possible. No, it was not that it was not possible. It was just too hard to happen, maybe because of the Kashmir issue. Now that it is push is now coming to shove slowly despite problems, I think we have gone much better. The Indian state has survived pretty well, and it is going to do much better. So I think, post India's justifications in a much legitimate sense in its own, reach out to everywhere, whether it is Europe or America, to let those people understand, and not the Christopher Jaffrelo type people, not those, but like proper people who need to know as to what's happening, even people to people to some extent, as to what's happening in Kashmir, what's happening in Jammu. I think that understanding India has done it pretty well. On certain issues like CA and others, of course, there have been problems, but overall, New Delhi has been catching up very well with government to government officials, key companies, key MNCs, key old boys club people in consulting firms and all those section of elites. That's where we have been doing well. On people to people, our people have been doing, and I think there's no issue. But of course, after what's happened in Israel and West Bank and Gaza. We need to see how that goes, but I don't think directly it would affect India, because then the Pakistani issue also is attributable to how our partners in Dubai and Sharjah, sorry, not Sharjah, Riyadh basically act. And I think the way the Saudis have been with us, I think that itself is a very interesting case study on some sort of multipolarity and multi alignment of middle powers. So I think that's where I would pause or end, let us say.
Yeah, just one point I want to add. In dehyphenation, one major difference, which is a positive difference that has happened, is the Gulf states, the Arab states, etc., no more talk about Pakistan when they want to have relations with India. That has been the most. Actually, that has led to others also dehyphenating to the large extent. But yes, Rishabh, the other part of the relation that I want to come to is during Modi 2.0, we have seen a lot of changes in the uh, governments in Pakistan. Like Imran Khan's government has gone, then the temporary government has been put upon, then there is a caretaker government now. Now there is going to be an election, and of course, Nawaz Sharif will come. So, what have been the w- w- do you think, like, how to reframe it? Okay, what are the lessons for Modi 3.0 if it happens, or any other government that happens, uh, with the way Modi 2.0 dealt with this changing scenario within Pakistan's domestic politics, basically?
I think I think what we have done well over the years is to ensure that we stand our ground on many issues. Don't be tempted by first empty gestures and empty words. I think in the case of Pakistan, especially, it has over the years or over the decades been very great at having some sort of plausible deniability. So, for example, when all of you guys are referring to the ceasefire, yes, the ceasefire is holding in many ways because the overall ceasefire violations, are very low. Uh, but again, there are other ways to increase the tension across the LOC, which is happening, right? You will not be able to increase the kind of attacks, or unless and until there is some sort of a go ahead or support coming from Pindi. So it's not as if Pakistan has been very docile and just rolling over the years. My major theme, I think, would be to now focus less on dehyphenation uh, and look at what Indian state has to do in the next stage. I think we need to come out of this triumphalist mode with regards to Pakistan, as if that that's done and dusted. It's in the rearview mirror, that everything now, because the Americans or Europeans on the world stage and in the public forums do not equate us with Pakistan and acknowledge that we've pulled ahead, that does not necessarily mean that we have dehyphenated, you know, from Pakistan to an extent that it is always going to be great within, between us. I think one probably the next step would be, again, this is my opinion, and I know many people don't agree with it, is not to you know you not fall into the trap of first uh, thinking that Pakistan is no more useful to countries like the US or Europe. I think that's a big misnomer. uh, and yes, I will agree that for the last few years that is the case, that has been the case in many ways, and obviously Pakistan has not been able to leverage itself as the garrison state that it is. But that can quickly change, and I would just urge the government and the discourse in general to not take Pakistan very lightly. Pakistan in many ways can and has inflicted all the casualties that you have seen in the last year. Okay. What the Rashtra Rifles have to face, had to face, what the special forces have had to face. I don't think everybody. I mean, everybody kind of has an idea that in many ways some of these incidents are a way to inflict damage on us, to send a message that not everything is hunky dory. Now, obviously, in many ways, it it doesn't capture the imagination of the larger public, because unless and until, and it's a very sad thing to say, but it is the reality, unless and until the casualty numbers are not in double digits, unless and until you don't see mm, two or three or multiple officers being killed in an attack, nobody really cares. That's the truth of it. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure, I mean, again, I don't mean to, I'm not going to question the tactics, etc. I don't think I have that expertise to question uh, that if whether there is something going wrong in terms of counterinsurgency operations. Obviously, there has been some small tactical shifts. How much of the support are they getting from certain communities in border areas, especially in the Rajouri Pooch area? All of that is there. My essential point here is to say that this idea that Pakistan has been, is the threat has been neutralized. The idea that, earlier because Bajwa had reached out to us with an olive branch of sorts, right? That the current military establishment or the governments to come, especially if the civil establishment goes under an overhaul and PLM and the Nawaz Sharif government, right? That essentially that government comes into power with the full backing of the military. Yes, there is a chance that some of the peace initiatives, or there would be some overtures, there would be some nice nice things, nice words being exchanged. But I don't think we should be we
But
have to be careful. We have to keep our guard up.
but Rishabh, do you think those overtures will be beyond just having few cricket match series and a few
Mm.
actors acting in Bollywood movies, or like do
I
you?
I actually believe that. I mean, again, controversial opinion, but I actually believe that the Prime Minister, the Indian Prime Minister, is very very keen on reaching some sort of a decision or a modus operandi with Pakistan. I know many people don't believe this to be true, but I do believe, considering the amount of back channel talks that and by the way, those back channel talks don't peter out very often. Even, I mean, I am not very sure of any media reports in recent months uh, telling us about back channel talks, but I'm pretty sure that there are some talks happening. I would say that the current in the last few months, because of some of the killings that have been reported in Pakistan and some of the temperature or some of the rise in casualty in near the border areas, would suggest that I don't think everything is hunky dory right now. But my estimation is that uh, I don't think there's a grand bargain to be made here. No government, and especially a PLMN backed, the army backed, any army backed civil establishment will not be able to concede anything to India. Now, obviously, the Pakistanis are still stuck on Article 370, trying to essentially say that, unless and until you guys don't reverse or give something to us when it comes to the legal changes that you've made in Kashmir, then essentially we are not going to talk. Now, that's a rigid, stance from them, but they have raised the stakes for themselves, and I continue to maintain that yes, there may be a few meetings, maybe a small diplomatic, pull aside, maybe in some multilateral fora, but I don't see anything big happening. Although I will say this, that unless and until PTI threat is neutralized domestically, there is no room for any of this. If, for example, the army feels that it's in essentially what we call the driver's seat, all the threat from PTI in the judiciary, within the middle rungs of army leadership, if all that is neutralized, I think then you could see some serious initiatives being pushed. I think, but before any peace initiative is pushed, if, and again, this is a big if, in case something happens, I think it will be more about reaching, trying to essentially go back to normalcy. Now, in India-Pakistan relation, we define normalcy. In the military sense, we essentially define it through ceasefire. And diplomatically, is essentially right now it's about restoring diplomatic relations. Right now, our diplomatic relations are severed. It's not the same. So the idea here would be, if something happens in the immediate or in the medium term, I think that will be the first step. I honestly don't believe that we are going to come close to any kind of a trade arrangement of sorts, although again I concede the government is more keen than it lets on in the public eye. And this is why I think I am a bit skeptical and I would like to urge some caution that Pakistan is not a done deal. Let's not focus, or let's not, be engaged in triumphalism that we have dehyphenated ourselves from Pakistan diplomatically. Hence, the threat has kind of petered out. I don't think that's the case, and
No,
Jammu
Rishabh,
Kashmir.
I think there is a bit misunderstanding. I didn't say we have dehyphenated. I am just saying
No, no,
the
I didn't mean to you. I was just making a general point to what you were saying before. Also, not
yeah.
this is not entirely directed at you.
No, no. What I mean by dehyphenation is whenever people used to talk about India, they used to only talk about Pakistan for the most part. Now, of course, we talk about Pakistan. Of course, it is important. Of course, it's our neighbor, but only in the sense that it doesn't get dominated in our India-related conversation. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but that's a very low bar. I'm saying, even if, for example, if you or all of us have been saying that that part has been, very emphatically achieved, then you have to raise the bar as to what that dehyphenation should mean. I think the next step for Indians or India in general has to be to raise cost, or essentially force some of our partners to take some strong stances on, Pakistan. You see, right now, let's be honest, I'll ask a question to all of you guys, uh, and you give me an answer. Everybody agrees that the US has essentially now tilted towards India in the relationship. Most people would agree, right? Now, I'm asking you, what has the US essentially done in recent years? Now, you remember the last major thing that Trump did was essentially to cut off military aid, right? And there was some hullabaloo about how the US gave, gave some military aid with regards to the maintenance or overhaul of the, with relation to the F-16 and this and other systems, right? So related systems. So I'm asking you, what do you think the US has done from the Indian perspective, apart from stopping some of the more extreme things it was doing, some of the policies related, which go back to obviously the Afghanistan days. So I'm just asking you, just I'm not like trying to get an answer or whatever. I'm just genuinely asking that, let's say in terms of dehyphenation, maybe the US has stopped telling India to, nodding India or nudging India to talk to Pakistan, etc., etc. So if I ask you, what would be your answer in terms of what does dehyphenation means in terms of what our partners ought to be doing on Pakistan?
So, Rishabh, I will let Yus answer this question, and I will add another question to this question, and I will let it be the last word of today's session by Yus. Yus, in addition to the Rishabh's question, can you also, like with that, summarize or at least talk about how has been Modi 2.0 with Afghanistan and especially Taliban regime? Yes, Yus.
Rishabh, could you just rephrase your question, because I'm sort of lost on what exactly your question was. What would dehyphenation?
No,
Uh,
what did other partners like US, etc., did on their part to contribute to India dehyphenating from Pakistan? Rishabh basically
yeah,
means
what are some of the direct policy decisions from your side which have led us to conclude that, not just the fact that we have the US has dehyphenated India and Pakistan diplomatically, but from our perspective, that the US is, or other, not just US but the Western partners, European partners, are now seeing Pakistan in a different light. So I'm saying, what are some of the concrete measures according to us that they have taken, which have led us to believe that we have totally, won this whole dehyphenation battle,
Okay,
even beyond diplomatic terms?
I would disagree, because I think it's a slightly more nuanced take within the NatSec circles I am in. The consensus seems to be that while India and Pakistan are no longer at the same place when you talk about uh, conventional kinetic forces, which is to say the armed forces and things of how many missiles do you have, how many tanks do you have, how many artillery guns you have, there's still very much this sentiment that they are going to increasingly play the nuisance maker, right? So the influence of Pakistan is not gone. In fact, repeatedly what I hear is, don't count Pakistan out just yet, especially once you've started to see an uptick in this in the Poonch area, the activity in the Poonch area. And it's for good reason, because going back to what I was saying, uh, look, dehyphenation is sort of messy because what happens is you say, okay, India and Pakistan have dehyphenated. They have dehyphenated in the sense that India is no longer seen as an equal of Pakistan in terms of conventional kinetic measures. We're seen as the bigger economy. We are seen as, God knows what they say about a democracy now, but we are seen as a better democracy, shall we say. And we are seen as a greater military power. But that is not to say that from the Indian perspective.
But my point is, how much of that is a function of what we are doing and what we are becoming, and how much of that is based on what others are doing with regards to India
No,
Pakistan?
no,
That's
Rishabh.
my question.
I think Rishabh. What changed is we were always that. It's just that others took notice under
No,
Modi 2.0 because of our diplomatic efforts. That's the
hold on.
only.
I think okay. Look, what's contributed to this? Primarily, one, the end of the war in not say war, whatever the Americans were doing in Afghanistan. Number two, Pakistan's own past catching up to them in terms of policy decisions, and here it's specifically on the economic front, coming home to bite them in the behind when it comes to the military front. Because obviously, when your economy is not doing too well, even if you do carve out a healthy slice of the pie for military expenditure, you're never going to be able to keep up to date in the arms race, right? I'm talking about it holistically. In certain areas, they may be different from us. And the third point is India's own growing conventional deterrence, right? We've not sat still the whole while. So I would argue, broadly speaking, these are the three factors that have led to the dehyphenation that most people think of, which is that in the
I
convention.
get that. I don't think you guys understand what I'm saying. I'm trying to push an idea about how we should reframe. If we are to say that this is what we've already achieved, how are we to reframe this in a way in which dehyphenation now doesn't just mean about how India and Pakistan are seen as equal, or how dehyphenation should not just now be about what India, how India is attractive about this, about that, on this front or that front. Now dehyphenation should also incur some action, some proactive action in India's favor from some of its partners. So I'm saying that in terms of, if we try to reframe and take it to the next level, which I think we will in many ways, because even from the American perspective, I think they are in many ways understanding the fact that with the kind of defense relationship that we are building with each other, sooner rather than later, how they are expecting us to do more on Russia, I think India would also expect the US to do more on Pakistan as well. So my question only is with regards to in recent years and maybe in the future, what are some of the things which other countries will work on in terms of enhancing or taking this dehyphenation to the next level? Because right now, dehyphenation in terms of policy
Oh,
measures from their side
I can
is
actually right off the
hmm,
top of my head, Richard. Like the most obvious one
hmm,
would be going back to what the British High Commissioner did, right? Stop going to POK. I mean,
yeah,
we could start there
exactly.
as a plan.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. That it has to be now India's prerogative to not keep on thinking about non action or non support from the British or the Americans to the Pakistani as a win. Now, the win should be to essentially, in many ways, force, I mean, not bend, but force or persuade some of our partners to take decisions which are actually in our favor, diplomatically and otherwise, right? So I'm just saying that we need to shift the goalpost in many ways, because what we have been gloating on, and I totally understand that there's a basis for that gloating. My point is done and dusted. That part is done. We need to move to the next level, and that's why we need to redefine and try to put concrete measures, push our partners to do something concrete on India Pakistan, not just dwell on what we've already achieved. And I agree on all the achievements, by the way. I, in fact, more than others, obviously, I totally agree. I mean, go back in 2016 and 2017 and remember all the op-eds that you were reading about India Pakistan. I mean, I remember Shwasni, Heather, and others talking about how India's policy in Pakistan is confusing and contradictory. One time we want to talk to them, the other time we don't want to talk to them. And then later on, obviously, when India stopped talking to them, the whole criticism was that India is being too rigid and India is not talking, etc., etc. And I think most people I probably would agree and acknowledge that India's Pakistan policy has worked in many ways. Obviously, I do agree that people especially now with what's happening in Kashmir, I think many people are a bit disillusioned with the fact that maybe the kind of some semblance of deterrence that we created post Balakot, that is gone, that is going, or
No,
at least that is fading,
look,
right?
I
So
would
maybe,
Rishabh, just very quickly, I just need to make this nuanced point here. We may have established deterrence in the sense that uh, if you do so there was a specific kind of attack that predates what we're currently seeing, right? I'm talking
yeah,
about the current Pooch attacks. Uh, Balakot worked then and up to a certain point. But if we aim to if we aim to induce deterrence, like proper deterrence, as in if you chop the head of an Indian soldier, you'll have
yeah,
X, Y, Z happen to you. That
hmm,
is only going to be possible by going through what is effectively third rail within national security circles, which is opening
yeah.
another front within Pakistan. Right? And I
Hmm.
think no one wants to talk about that publicly for very obvious reasons because it
I
leads
think,
to
and
dark
I
alleys.
let's be honest. I think that third front, or in many ways, has been already created for
No,
people who
I'm
know.
Rishabh, I'm talking about it going to another level, right? Like, please
Yeah.
understand where I'm heading with
So
this. I
that's
can't
what
say it
I'm saying.
explicitly.
So that's what I'm saying. If, for example, you are taking some actions which you have not taken before, I'm saying, would that not require more support from your international partners, especially partners who are more crucial to the survival of the Pakistani state and the economy and the
Yeah, so
military?
I would actually reframe it, right? I would say
Hmm,
do a Pakistan on them, which is okay,
hmm,
we're operating in this area. We are
yeah,
doing such and such. Tell you what,
yeah.
stop sending your chaps to POK, right? Start sitting down with us and understanding what we are telling you, and we'll automatically stop playing our games, right?
You know,
Don't give us what you want,
hmm,
and we will continue
I'm
making it worse.
hmm, I'm actually very I'm thoda, I mean, again, there is no basis for what I'm about to say. At least there is no concrete basis, but in India, Pakistan, and all these other things, usually there is no basis unless and until somebody leaks some half-ass information to some journalist. Uh, but I would say that recent trips made by the Pakistan Army chief, not just recent in terms of few months, but the pattern of the visits that he has taken, and I'm not just talking about a visit to DC, which was widely reported, but to Britain and some of our officials visiting, UK and some of the European capitals. I do think there is some, either an attempt to get us on the same page on some of the issues, especially with regards to the subcontinent, or there is an understanding that maybe things are not going in a way that we would like, or we're not getting that much support. So I think something that we need to look out is how Indian security establishments is interacting with um, especially Britain, because I think the Pakistanis see the Brits as
The Brits are the
some sort
backbone.
of, yeah, if they are people think that the back channel is the UAE and the Gulf countries. Actual back channel when it comes to the military actually is the Brits, which very few people want to talk about, because remember, Bajwa was it was, I think, the UK High Commissioner or one UK diplomat who actually first publicly said that Bajwa is trying to make peace with India and is requesting the Indian establishment to concede or give him some small wins when it comes to post 370 Kashmir, in order to maintain this normalcy, which now we know Imran Khan deliberately killed. Or by the way, I do think that it's not Imran Khan doesn't have the, even back then he did not have that much of pull that he would have killed an initiative by Bajwa himself alone. So my skepticism comes from the fact that the military establishment and many people within not just the ISI but senior army leadership don't actually want any sort of normalcy with India. So my concern here is just the fact that we should not be complacent about Pakistan, that part being done and dusted. So yeah.
Yeah, so Yus, I would like you to finish with the other question and we will end the session with that. That is general brief about how was our policy with regards to Afghanistan, especially the Taliban. Yes.
I don't think there's so it's actually in a way it's good you kept this last because there isn't much to say other than a lot of speculation because a lot of what is happening vis-a-vis the Taliban is whispers you hear within national security circles of we're talking to X person, no we're talking to Y person. From time to time you'll see a news article pop up that Mullah Yaqub has said something that's quite virulently anti-Pakistan, or you'll see something to the effect of Indian establishment or institution X is training Taliban in task Y, and it's usually like a certificate course of some kind. Or I think the one that made the most waves was back when I think it was Mullah Yaqub who said that he wanted closer defense relations with India or something like that. But this also plays into the broader factionalism you're seeing within the Taliban that has its own intricate politics. So there's a lot to speculate here. But concretely, all we know for a fact is the Indians do have at least limited engagement with some factions of the Taliban. The Taliban, for their own reasons, are trying to hedge and trying to play us as one of the powers to hedge with. And lastly, I'll put it this way. There is a lot of stick given to the Indian government for not talking to the Taliban. I think Rishabh touched on this a while ago, of not talking to the Taliban pre the downfall, right? And I think that's a little bit overdone because, in as Rishabh mentions, in that phase, who are you talking to exactly? Right? Like who are you trying to build bridges with? What message are you sending to other people? And finally, I'll end with this. Whatever be our talks with the Taliban, I think it's important to remember this. Uh, in the future, whenever POK comes up seriously, right, and India makes whatever moves it has to. I know a lot of people think we'll never do it, but just roll with me. India makes the moves we have to. The current TTP, which a lot of Indians are quite happily cheering for, or even the TJP, the Tehreek-e-Jihad Pakistan for that matter, uh, they will become a problem, right? Like at least we can be sure that at least the Haqqani faction will start to pose problems. And while I think it is the Kandaharis who are under Yaqub, while they may not play, sorry, not the Kandaharis, while the northern factions may not play as much of a role, we may get pushback there. So this is medium to long term. That is something to keep in mind.
Should we be worried about Pakistani Taliban starting its activities in Pakistan again?
I would say yes. I would actually say yes, primarily because what it will mean is a pivot of Pakistani resources into fighting the TTP. You're already seeing this, but you're already starting to see how strained they are. And what will happen is the more strained they become, I can tell you for a fact that elements within the ISI will only become more bold in pushing the kind of punch attacks you're seeing today. Right? Whether they do it with sanction or without sanctions, a different matter. It will increase quite rapidly.
I mean, to be fair, I mean, if you talk about Pakistani Taliban, they are like they haven't been more active at any point of time in their own history. So right now you're seeing, last year also you saw, tribal what you call a jigras being sent from the Pakistani side, essentially a group of elders, right, tribal elders, jirga being sent to the Afghan side, essentially to kind of persuade and assuage some of their concerns. Remember, Pakistani Taliban also has a lot of goodwill in KP and what you call the larger region, the FATA region in Pakistan. So essentially, right now what you're seeing is, I think the Pakistani army establishment realizes some of the problems that they have. They have realized that strong arming the Taliban has not worked because Taliban is so factionalized, and some of their factions have so much of affinity and commonality with some of the Pakistani Taliban
They
on
literally
that
married
side of the
into them.
border. Yeah, exactly. So they've realized that there is no way, because of this consolidation and the idea that some of these factions are not going to break away, are not going to give up what they call their brothers, right? I think there's a realization that now the Pakistani state has to again start talks. So that is why you see, for example, some of the political leaders going in an unofficial capacity from Pakistan, being sent by the army to meet not just the Taliban leadership, but the Pakistan Taliban leadership, right? And it is, I mean, again, we don't know what is exactly is going to happen now, but ultimately, the TTP is a very strong factor, and many people obviously, we don't also want to talk about Balochistan, how they are active, not just in terms of the militant attacks, but the current civil unrest that you're seeing with regards to the protests in Islamabad and Karachi and any other places. So I think Pakistan has its plate full, but at the same time, as Indians, we have to realize Pakistan has always had, its hands full or its plates full. And
Rishabh, uh,
yeah,
very quickly, just if I could just buttress this point, right? Because I want to make myself explicitly clear. When I say that the TTP is a problem, it is a problem precisely because Pakistan has made an absolute pig's breakfast of its own internal national security. They are the ones who
yeah,
created
yeah.
and bred this current threat, and they are the ones who need to clean it up. So if they come to us and they're like, oh, we need to pivot to the TTP, do you
Oh, no,
mind sort
no.
of toning
Yeah,
it
yeah,
down?
no.
We just need to tell them, listen, long story short, get rid of your animals, you bred these pets, you put them down, don't do it, and we'll do it for you.
And
Right?
yeah, I
That's the
mean,
bottom line.
there is no. I mean, we don't have any pull to begin with. I mean, we don't figure in the picture, to be very honest. A lot of people in India obviously think that we can play some positive role, etc. We have absolutely no role in all of this. Obviously, in the world of, the broader world, the shady world, we don't know a lot of the stuff that goes on. But I'm pretty sure that, most of these problems, Pakistan saw it coming, and they had some of their policy establishment people, even scholars and many military officials have been warning about this. But the Pakistani state was very comfortable, the ISI was very comfortable, thinking that we will be able to assuage their concern. But again, I will end with this, that Taliban is no friend of India either, right? Right now they try to use India to play, to kind of, show Pakistan that they have the trump card, so to speak. And the whole achievement of Pakistani state in Afghanistan in the last few decades will now turn to dust if, for example, they push Taliban too hard, which they have tried to do, by the way, through forced deportation, etc. But again, as I said, Taliban is no friend. But yes, right now, many factions of the Taliban, including the Haqqani network, have been a bit, there have been back channels there. It's not out there in the media, but again, many circles, it's an open secret that India has back channel, negotiate not negotiations, but dialogue on with not just the old factions of the Taliban, which we have been accustomed to. So I think India's wait and watch policy has kind of worked. And not that we have any, I'm not giving India too much credit here also. As you pointed out, this is mostly their own failure, right? There's their own mess. So we are benefiting from that wait and watch policies, not that we had many options before. But right now, I would say that Pakistan's hands are full, yes, on that side of the border, but that does not mean that the Pakistani state will not look on this side. In fact, precisely whenever Pakistan feels very threatened and insecure, militarily, politically unstable, it is precisely at that time that they look at India and try to, raise some trouble. So I think India needs to be very cautious here. Many people have been talking about what is the takeaway from Israel Palestine for India? What are the lessons for India? Right? And we talk about military stuff and all that, paragliding and this and that. All of that is very less, I would say relevant. I think the point that we should take away here is that any country or any faction or terrorist group which feels very alienated thinks that its cause in the international fora is losing ground, is losing legitimacy. They can essentially, when they think that they have nothing to lose, they can try to do something dramatic again to get not just attention, but sympathy from other jihadist forces in the region. I think that it is because of that reason we need to be more careful of Pakistan and don't dismiss it by saying, "Oh, inke paas to khane ka bhi kuch nahi, ye hame kya karenge," and all that. If you've read Pakistani history, its economics, its politics, Pakistan has always been like this. I mean, yes, it has seen better days, obviously, but that does not mean we should underestimate it.
I'll just end with one line myself. I'll just put it this way. Speaking of mowing the grass, right? If you don't, pouring kerosene and burning the entire lawn down always seems like an extreme option until you realize that one of these days, the grass that you're letting grow in your lawn will call snakes in, and those snakes will kill your kids, right? So burn it down when the time is right, rather than sacrificing some of your kids to learn the same lesson. I'll end with that.
Yes, that's a good note to end today's session. I think this has been the longest session under the Globalized series ever, and we have quite comprehensively covered the Modi 2.0's whole neighborhood approach, pretty much the all parts. I think Myanmar and other larger connectivity areas, larger other aspects of the neighborhood, I think we will cover in the next session of Indo-Pacific Foreign Policy Review under Modi 2.0. We will announce the next session dates later after talking to you, Rishabh, and other guests whenever they are available, because we can't just announce and later cancel it, because that has happened quite a lot. So we will consult with them. So, Abhivardhan, before we end, can you inform everyone where can they access this
Sure,
podcast?
sure. I'll be quick. And please do not leave before I tell you this. Please, it's just quick. Okay. This is already on YouTube. So just search the Bharat Pacific or Bharat Pacific. Search my name if you wish to, and Bharat Pacific, you'll get it. Okay. On YouTube and Google, you'll get it. On Spotify, go to Bharat Pacific. Search it on Spotify. Search it on Amazon Prime and other podcasts. We're also on indian.substack.com, which is the Substack of the Indian Society of AI and Law, the parent behind Bharat Pacific. And yeah, you can follow me on Indus Think, because we will be doing all these spaces on through me. So yeah, follow me, and for other updates and articles, you can actually go to bharatpacific.com. So yeah,
And you
that's it.
can also follow our wonderful guests, Rishabh, Yus, and of course,
Of
Abhivardhan,
course.
Bharat Pacific in Twitter, and of course, even me, if you want to. So, yeah.
Yeah, please do follow Aditya. Yeah.
Yeah, but thank you, Yus, thank you, Rishabh, thank you, Abhivardhan, and thank you for all for being patient. I think this is the longest session we have ever done, but it was quite comprehensive, and I think it was worth it. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for
Thank you,
inviting
everyone.
me. It was
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, thank you. Yeah. See you. Good night, everyone, and happy weekend.